Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. It is Pandit Satish K Sharma again, and we meet in person today. Namaskar, sir.
Pranam ji, namaskar, Jai Shri Rama.
Jai Shri Ram. So, viewers, you might wonder, where is it that the paths of Pandit Satish Sharma and Sree Iyer cross? Well, they cross somewhere in the middle in a town called Princeton, and we are here for the 30th anniversary of Infinity Foundation. We both took part in some panels, and now we're going to talk about the favorite country, United Kingdom, of which Pandit Sharma is a citizen. Panditji, this two-tier Kier is just blowing my mind. I'm telling you, and you're getting close to 4,000 illegals every week. Give or take. You can come back and tell, no, it wasn't that high.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, what exactly does Kier have for them?
It's a wonderful place to start the conversation. I think a few months ago it was just an academic conversation in the United Kingdom, but the escalation in numbers, the scale in total of the numbers has now become so high that it's becoming a daily, I would say moment by moment, concern for the average British citizen. We are seeing, for example, a tiny small rural village in England with only 700 indigenous residents having a hotel built only a few yards away where they're housing 800 people, unvetted, untrained, unprepared, certainly no aspect of assessment of their suitability, their occupations, their skill sets, and they're just being housed all over the country. So this is not migration. People use the phrase illegal migration, but actually it's not migration at all. There are no women who are coming over. There are no children who are coming over. The ages of all of these young men are military fighting age. There's no doubt about it. And so we are seeing, as a matter of policy, shall we say, people are actually saying it's replacement of a certain demographic. But I think it's actually worse than that. This is deliberate. And we have a way of looking at these things in our tradition. And that is, it accepts that most of us have a fairly healthy worldview. That this is how the country works. These are the values, these are the institutions, and this is how it all functions. But this phenomenon is really requiring everyone to revisit that framework because it doesn't make sense. And if something doesn't make sense so obviously, then your framework is completely out of sync. There is something else going on. And when you expand the framework to accommodate everything that's going on, so that you can build into it all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, a new picture emerges. And the British people are now being forced to expand their frameworks. And the picture that's emerging is one which is causing huge concerns. The picture that's emerging is that the British indigenous population is at the end of a very long queue when it comes to government services or public services. They're also at the very end of a queue where it comes to human rights. They're at the end of a very long queue when it comes to safety, policing, and all of the things, access to health, the accommodation that's being provided for these illegal invaders. In one day and age, they would have been called invaders. When people got onto the boats and came into this country, the last time it happened in such numbers were Vikings. Right? And the Vikings were not here to add value to the way in which the existing country worked. They were here to invade. They were here to rape. They were here to pillage. And the British population is now openly being asked, they're asking themselves the question, we're being lied to. Right? We are seeing discrimination on a scale and of a type that has never been seen before. This discrimination is discriminating against the white majority, middle to working classes at every level of society. And so they are now saying, okay, we have actually got a government in power which doesn't have our interests at heart at all. And in fact, it may be acting in a manner which is harmful to us, deliberately and as a matter of policy. That's the realization that I'm hearing and receiving feedback on from all over the country. There is one aspect to this which is so obvious that nobody really notices. Nobody asks the question. These young men who are coming over in huge numbers, they're not monks, they're not celibate, they're not bringing family over. And a time is going to come when they're going to want to establish relationships. And who are they going to establish those relationships with? If it's not the daughters, the sisters of the indigenous white population. Can you see the tension that this is going to create? It's so obvious. The government is not responding to any concerns about it. In fact, it's saying anybody who expresses concerns is a racist, is far right. And yet, that's far from the truth.
I have a question for you, Mr. Prime Minister. Why are you doing this to your own subjects? They gave you such a monumental verdict. I mean, they were not happy with the Conservatives, and I don't know, they are looking very good at this point of time. Today, if you go to elections, I don't know whether you'll even get half of the number of seats you've got. Maybe not. Maybe there is another universe in which you are getting a lot of traction. But why stick it to yourself, your own people? What does that get you? I would like to know.
Sree, there is a very uncomfortable truth we're going to have to recognize. And the British people are, well, the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and the Irish are recognizing this very uncomfortable truth. And that truth is very simply that the decisions that this government makes again and again and again do not accept the people of these islands as citizens. Okay, they are consumers, they are exchequer fodder, they pay a lot of taxation in, but they are not being treated in a manner in which one would treat one's own citizens. If you open a British passport, there's a glorious statement at the beginning, the Secretary of State requires you to respect this person as a citizen of the United Kingdom, and so on. But the sentiment isn't there. People are now beginning to say that if you have a British passport, the only thing it does is require you to pay taxes. And that's the extent of it. There are so many people who are coming through the borders without a passport. So that value has gone. There are so many people who are getting accommodation in luxury housing without having to pay for it, as well as a monthly stipend. And yet we have...
Is this forever?
Well, certainly until the next elections, and thereafter it will be seen. But the bigger worry that's happening now is there's an old adage, isn't there, that you can vote a socialist government in, but you have to fight to get the socialist government out. Because one thing that they always do historically is manipulate democracy to get into power and then dismantle the processes and procedures of democracy. And there are 2 or 3 warning signs. The first is the stifling of freedom of speech. And we have seen that. Everybody has seen that this is happening. The second is the erosion of the processes of democratic engagement. And that normally means people cancelling elections, making some sort of bureaucratic statement that this year we're not going to have any elections because of some boundary changes or something like this. And we're seeing that on a wholesale scale. I think there are 15 locations who have been told that there are going to be no elections this year because of boundary changes, no local elections in the coming year because of boundary changes. And we have elections on May the 1st, I think. And there are 15 which have been told there are going to be no elections. So some sort of a reason can be concocted to stop elections in the places where they are the weakest. And so that is also happening now. The third phenomenon is when the mechanisms for justice start to become discriminatory. We recognize, and we did a lot of work with this on SB 403,
yes,
facial neutrality. It's a fundamental foundational principle of jurisprudence that the authorities must not take account of identity. And yet what the British people watched was those 3 young Pakistani Muslim men attacking police officers in an airport, breaking the nose of one woman police officer, and yet they hadn't been arrested for many, many weeks. Okay, the trial has been postponed on a number of occasions, and yet a woman, a Christian woman, standing quietly outside of an abortion clinic with her eyes closed praying gets arrested. A man goes into a WhatsApp group and types up a criticism of a school, and 6 police officers turn up on his doorstep to reprimand him about the remarks. The school found them offensive and worrisome. This is a rebalancing of the way in which justice is being applied, hence 𝗤𝗘𝗙𝗃𝗧. And those are just tiny examples. The other examples are vast and wide-ranging. If I give you one trumpet, a bugle announcement which suddenly caused everyone to think and look back, was after the terrible incidents in Southport when those beautiful young girls were slaughtered ritualistically by a young man bearing a machete, right? Now, a director of public prosecutions would know not to make any remark which might compromise or taint the progress of a police inquiry. And yet, Kier stood there and he said, we have to be careful of the far right. Now, just think, if a white young man had been the perpetrator, he's already being labelled as far right because the Prime Minister of the country has declared that this is an issue. So you're already tampering in the process of law. And it's not just two-tier in that there is an imbalance, it's actually very specifically targeting one group for discrimination, positive, and another group for discrimination, negative. And this is now being seen on a daily basis. If there is no justice and there is no freedom of speech, then you're no longer in a democracy. And so what is it? Everybody is beginning to ask this question. And if you think about what history teaches us, whenever this point is arrived at, the next step is civil disorder. The next step is people, historically speaking, saying, if we're required to pay taxes to a system which discriminates against us, that's no longer a democratic process. That is a dictatorship.
Panditji, why did things come to this?
Who's responsible?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the blame probably lies with both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. There are many things where the Conservatives had an obligation to look after the interests of the indigenous people of the islands. I remember clearly Rishi Sunak saying that we're going to have inquiries into these rape gangs. I remember,
you mean like grooming gangs?
Yeah. Well, the grooming gangs, it makes it sound more civilized than it actually is.
Rape gangs, yeah.
Right? And according to the statistics, over 1 million individual cases of criminal rape and abuse occurred without adequate policing and certainly without justice. Justice is totally absent from that. The Conservatives had 14 years to do something about this. Sajid Javid, who was a member of the Pakistani community, he served as Home Secretary. He said, I'm going to do something about this. 𝗼𝗘𝗍 Patel, she said, I'm going to do something about this. They didn't. If anything, it's continuing, and the response that we're hearing is that it's actually getting worse, if it's possible to be worse. So the Conservatives certainly had their fair share of opportunities to do something. They didn't. And the population got very, very unhappy that the Conservatives haven't done anything about this. Then we have Labour who came in saying, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. They secured enough of a majority to have a good majority in the House. And now on most of their key core foundational policy promises, the manifesto, and they've completely abandoned them and are doing things which were never mentioned in the manifesto. And many things are actually contrary to what was going to be, what was promised in the manifesto. So it's being seen now that Labour lied and cheated their way into power. And that is not democracy. You know, the people in a country, when that happens to them, they too feel that if the forces of law and order are breaking law and not doing things which maintain order, then why should we? Who's going to protect us if they become our enemy? You know, policing by consent has always been a foundation of British law. What if the public withdraws that consent and says, no, we demand something different? So we are literally on the brink of a breakdown of law and order. And if that happens, we all know an economy implodes. There will be no financial prosperity. There will be no increases in GDP. There will be inflation. There will be possibly even a hike of interest rates. And it's becoming very polarized. On the one hand, you have the indigenous people of the islands. On the other hand, you have the British, who I call the ruling elite. They're the British ones. And then you have the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, and the English. And that polarity is now being literally talked about on a daily basis. Those two groups, the Uni Party as they're now being called, are both responsible. But the heart of the problem, where it started from, was the legal changes brought into the British statutory legislation by Tony Blair. He brought in 2010 something called the Equality Act, and it genuinely installed into law huge inequalities. And it made the power and authority of Parliament subservient to so many other influences. So Tony Blair has definitely got a lot to answer for. But I would say it started with him, and then the Conservatives and the Labour Party did not fulfil their contract to the indigenous population. And so it's getting to that point now where the next step is huge upset in normal daily civil life.
It almost seems like the British government thinks that they have the vote bank, which will enable them to come back to power. And as long as things are done towards that, we don't care about what the rest think, because there's another party now, right? Reform Party.
Well, we're here in the United States. I think the same policy was tried and trotted out recently. And the conclusion was that the public said no. Eventually, the public said no. You cannot bring in so many illegal persons, give them citizenship, and expect us to continue paying our taxes and doing all of this and getting nothing in return. In fact, getting shortchanged in return. The British people are moving in that direction. But my worry is that somebody who is so ideologically driven, as Sir Keir appears to be, or there's some sort of compulsion which is requiring him to make decisions which are so abnormal, right, as to warrant further scrutiny. And there are times when I look at what he's done in the first 100 days and the changes that have come into the British way of life. If an alien power were to manage to get into the position of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, one of their agents, this is the way in which he would dismantle Britain. This is exactly how it would be done. You undermine the confidence of the young men who are going to step forward and say, yes, we will join the army to protect the country. What do? You blame everything on white working class boys. And there's such a lot of pressure on the white working class boys at this moment. When it comes to business activity, what do? You absolutely destroy confidence in the economy. When it comes to the sense of well-being and safety and security of the average person on the street, you destroy that by discrimination, but also by very punitive tax impositions. We were talking earlier, only a short while ago, about the farming tax, the tax on the inheritance tax. Everybody knows that farms are asset wealthy, but cash flow poor. You might have a £10 million farm with huge acres, but you can't eat it and you can't spend it. You have to work it, and it may well be that such a large farm only produces 50,000 revenue at the end of the day. And so if inheritance tax comes in and you have to pay 40% to the government on the death of the person who owns it, you can no longer pass that land and that farm to your children who you've worked on teaching how to work with the land. Suddenly you're dismantling the food provision systems and ecosystem of a nation. These are the sort of activities that would be done by somebody with hostile intentions towards a nation, working towards a predetermined goal of deconstructing that society.
There was a time when British politics was held as a standard for the world as to how politics should be done.
Well, that's how it was sold. It was always two-tier. One tier was what was told to the rest of the world, and then the real tier was what was done behind closed doors that hardly anybody knew about and was really well protected. But in this day and age, that facade has cracked beyond repair. And what we're seeing as we look through those cracks is not a pleasant sight. Not only that, people are now beginning to talk about what they're seeing as they look through those cracks. And so the next predictable step is stop people communicating. Oh, lo and behold, we need an online policing and control piece of legislation. And it's here.
Well, dark clouds over United Kingdom. And this is the continuing series of conversation that I'm having with Panditji. This is where we're going to stop this episode, and we'll pick it up on the other side. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.
Sorry, can I make one concluding remark, a message for the people of the United Kingdom, and especially the British Hindus? A nation is like a boat, and it's a very large boat. And as British Hindus, we have worked in one corner of the boat, feeling comfortable with what we're doing. We've been doing it in isolation. We look after our children, we build wealth, we build our businesses, etc., etc. But we have ignored the fact that a nation is like a boat, and when it enters stormy waters, everybody is thrown into very difficult times. Heaven forbid, if a boat sinks, everybody gets at least their feet wet, and many people will lose a lot more than just comfort and stability. And so the British Hindu community, which has never really engaged in steering the nation, we have an investment of at least 4 generations. 4 generations ago, we had our forefathers came to the United Kingdom, and they tolerated bullying. They tolerated genuine racism. They tolerated and survived true attacks by the real far-right extremists. And we have all of that invested in the well-being of the United Kingdom. It's time that we have to make a choice. Either we will be leaving it in huge numbers, and there are many, many people I know who have either made the decision to move or who are actively thinking about it. Or we stay and we say, we have a right to be here. We have served our time. We have contributed of our life energy in building this nation, and nobody is going to just push us away from it and throw us overboard. So it's coming to that time. We have to make a choice, and I would really ask everyone to commit to making the choice. We have a role to play. We can make a difference. As members of a dharmic tradition, we work very hard in all the fields where we work, and we're very influential and successful in those. The one where we don't is the political and the religious life of the country, and that's where there is a huge contribution to be made. So I would really appeal to everyone, roll up your sleeves, and do not let anybody prevent you from contributing towards the stability and the ongoing success and prosperity of the United Kingdom. It's a great time to engage with courage and with commitment, and let's see whether we can make a difference. So, Jai Shri Ram to everyone. And Sreeji, thank you so much for those extra words. A pleasure to be with you. And I look forward to our ongoing conversations.
Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Namaskaram ji.